that have been on my mind, probably like the same things. Why? Okay. One of the things is I've been trying to figure out ways of talking about um, the what I call the overlay of social engineering and mind control on our everyday reality, because there is this way that even people who talk about these issues are putting it in a category over there, and it's really right here right now. And how narratives are constantly being developed and talked about and then spread through our voices, and how it's like it's spelling, because it is constant. The information overload is always happening. And where I get down to is like, what do I really know? What do I know, and what is just being suggested that I know? For example, one of the narratives that's going around is this cortisol thing. I don't even know what it is because I don't want to go into it and look at it, because also remember the whole serotonin thing. The institutions are putting out, they're sort of at the pinnacle of how information gets, with narratives, gets spread. So their institutions are owned by these ancient bloodlines, people who own the big companies, the big extracting companies, are connected to ancient bloodlines. Ancient bloodlines have had some form of control, and one of those ways is through government education. Government education is our public schooling and our higher institutions. They are sponsored and funded by these bloodlines. Because when I talk about this stuff, people go, well, who is they? Even though I explained who they were. Instead, I just like to say they, because I don't even know who exactly they are, but I know that they shape information through these studies. Oh, studies say, blah, blah, blah. Whenever I hear that, I just come up with a lot of questions. Who, what, where, why, what's the control, blah, blah, blah. Who's sponsoring it? And what drug is behind it as the solution or product? Because that's always a part of it too. How do we promote our industries that we use to control everybody? So it's just like a vicious cycle. It's a whirl. A whirl is a cycle, and we live in the world. So it is a cycle that's always repeating. And okay, so the cortisol thing, yeah, I don't know. And what I focus on, because what I do know is there's an energetic field around everyone. That seems to correlate to every understanding of energy and the body, is there is a field. It's a luminous egg. It's a toroidal field. There's an energy around us. We all have our own. And then though it can be bigger or smaller based on our vibration, our health. I notice when people drink a lot of alcohol, they'll get like a gray color to them, and it's not like they're gray, but their skin and everything turns to this certain color because the liver is being flooded with too much of a poison. So when it's in an imbalance, you can kind of see that the energy field is low, and the vibrancy of the skin changes. And also when people have too high of a vibration, it's almost, it's not necessarily a good thing to have too high of a vibration. Really, the goal with your vibration is to be centered, to feel centered and not whoa, 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 like in a manic kind of state. Oh, I'm thinking of all this stuff. I'm coming up with all this stuff. And this gets into the season we're going into, which is Gemini. We're coming now on a new moon, but there's little discrepancies with new moons and dark moons, because like Jewish culture and other cultures, the Zoroastrian culture, they oh, that bird's so sweet. They focus on the first crescent as the new moon. And the dark phase is when the sun and moon are so close together, they're rising at the same time, because the moon has gone through all 12 signs and now it's in the 12th, repeating. And then there is no light to the moon because of the magnetism of the sun and the moon are come together, and they're like stuck together. And so there's no energy combination, harmony. It's just like kind of a quiet time, a quieter time in the sky with the frequencies. And then the moon moves ahead of the sun. This is the pattern. The moon moves ahead of the sun and makes the first crescent is in the next sign that the sun will now move into. So we have this phase, and we are heading into the dark phase. So there's no energy. So you can feel tired also and a little, worn out, which is, I've definitely been feeling that the last couple days. And we're going into a black phase. The black phase lasts for a couple days, and then the first crescent will appear. And this is what these older cultures marked as the beginning of the phase. And usually their holidays are like 14 days in from the first crescent. It's not marked from the black phase. So there's something to that. Either way, you focus on setting intentions for the next cycle of the moon. And the sun and the moon together are making a harmonic. They're like an instrument playing the chords and the whatever, the bass and treble. I don't know. I don't play instruments. I play a drum, but I don't play chords. But they're like two chords mixing, sun and moon, as the moon builds, and then it has this crescendo with the full moon. So these are two chords being played and creating a harmony, creating energy. So that's why there's a higher energy at these full moon times, and definitely affects our reality we live in. And those who want to control this reality, use those times to do their bullshit, basically. Their wars, all the other stuff that they do. So there is a benefit to understanding the patterns, because then you can see how they use it. Like, we began the year with Aries, and that begins war. Mars rules Aries. Mars is a planet of war. It doesn't have to be that way. It's actually spring and life, but on the polarity of that is death and war. So there's always this way that they utilize the energies. They utilize astrology, astrotheology. They understand the cycles of the seasons. So when we get to the point that we're in now, we're coming into Gemini season, which rules the mind and hemispheres of the brain. It rules the lungs and the branches of the lungs, and the hands and the shoulders. So the Geminis are real handsy. They can do a lot of things. Also, traditionally, Geminis were known as channelers. They can pull in information, and it's an air sign that coordinates to the mind and mental energy. So people I know who have several planets in Gemini, especially Mercury, the sun, if they've got multiple energies, angles of light in Gemini, they will have a lot of mental energy. So then it becomes about how to harmonize that and pull that mental energy down into the heart and run your mental energy, and also set boundaries with pulling in information, because you don't want to always be tuned in to the collective energy, because it gets very there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear in the collective as they are manipulated by the outer forces. It's not necessarily innate to people, and yes, there are a lot of hard aspects to living in this reality, whether you want to blame the presidency or this or that. It's this is where you need to apply this understanding of mind control and social engineering. It is not over there. It did not die with Jeffrey Epstein. It is here now, always. And it's always playing into information. And they had a whole understanding, and they've worked in nefarious ways to understand the mind and how programmable we are. Now we hear about different, studies, the LSD, how they were dosing people. Psychologists are not necessarily on the side of health. They have been tied to these nefarious organizations, because then this gets into funding, money, how money gets funded for these studies. And you're already given a frame. Okay, we want you to find this. So they find it. Guess what? Why do they find it? Because they're already got that frame of reference, their perception. So then this gets into the metaphysics of this reality, which is whatever you go looking for, you will find here. And I can give you numerous examples of people finding all kinds of things. They just sort of get a hint and start looking and unraveling a whole rabbit hole, and they will find it. So what is that? That's amazing. And it shows that there are many, many, many realities happening here at once. So science is being funded by certain influences. Certain types are funding science and telling us, what is happening in science, in the environment, the climate change, for example. That is a whole rabbit hole, and then it's been made into a political issue, so we really can't even look at it. But up is down and down is up in this reality, and philosophers talk about this all the time, through time. So what I'm saying is I'm putting it all together, and there is, I don't know what's going on necessarily in places I don't live. And so the news is a corporate entity. So we think we're getting good information. We don't know, actually, because it's been shown over and over through FOIA, requests and things like that, that it wasn't what we thought it was. Vietnam was a huge drug deal. Very nefarious. Also, the CIA has infiltrated almost every social movement you could ever imagine that was created naturally. They then infiltrate it and steer it. And so we're being culled and steered like cattle, which is not to insult cattle. They're amazing. We love cows. But we're being, culled into camps of good and bad and who's this and that. So we have to remember, because coming into Gemini season, this is a season of, it's like the branching off from the spring, getting into the heat of the summer, the branches of the lungs, the voice. Our Prez is a Gemini, born on an eclipse. Guess what? All these deletes are born in some way that is scheduled and aligned with astrological energies. So you can look at that, and it's very interesting. He's a Gemini. He's always saying, like, off the cuff, making it up as he goes along, the trickster. That's who he is, and very much embodies that. I am not pro or con. I am in the center of that information. Sorry, I'm getting hot. And yeah, I have hot flushes, and it is a thing. Midlife, yes. So what was I saying? Oh, the mind, and really being aware of, okay, so this is mental energy. There's going to be a lot of energy with the mind, and we really need to recognize that that's what's happening, and it could be happening. We could be affected because the moon and the sun will be in that placement. And the other thing I'm always talking about is this, Geminis represent the trickster, the comedian, the, kind of making it up as they go along, because they're pulling in information. So they can pull in the vibes. And information is just everywhere, floating in the ether. And ether is an important thing to understand. Air signs and ether are very aligned. So we have to understand that this is a full-on trickster reality. And every, mythology, which is logical myth, logical stories, is what mythology means. Doesn't mean it's not true. They're stories to help us understand this reality. And, through these allegories, that there is a lot of energy that is wanting to take us over, move us in different ways. And so it's good to really ground yourself in the earth, the nature, and the water. This is a great time for the water. And I just got some gear to swim the river. And I spent like an hour and a half at the river the other day, and it was just like heavenly. It feels really good to swim. So we have to just keep grounded and not get taken over by information. And so that is what I am focused on. Oh yeah, and I was going to talk a little bit about other narratives, health narratives, that are really, they've taken off. I mean, if you look at virology and the beginnings of virology, you will be like really kind of shocked at what virology is and what they do. Also, there is something just jumped, maybe a frog. There is also this kind of this narrative of parasites, and like, I remember when when Instagram got taken over, they were upgrading, they did a big upgrade, and it turned into like more ads, more big accounts, 10,000 likes, I only see big stuff now. I rarely see like a small account of my friends. So it's interesting. I'll see a few, but the same ones. It's like, what about my other 2,000 friends that I follow? Not that they're all my friends, but people that I'd like to hear from more. I don't get that. And I was getting this crazy, like, Keanu Reeves talking about how he's got parasites in his brain and from his dog and all this stuff. 'Cause there's a whole thing with the dogs, like, being really, everybody has dogs and they're pushing them around in baby strollers, and they're all on pharmaceuticals. Not all of them, but there's a lot of them on pharmaceuticals, which is weird also. um, and so there's this, I was getting ad after ad of these, like, parasites, parasites, parasites. So it's like, what does it do to the mind when you're getting a repetitive ad about, and it's done in a story, like it's a content, somebody's content, like I'm seeing Keanu Reeves content for some reason. And but what does it do to the mind after that? The other thing I was getting was Depo-Provera, like this shot. They're always messing with women and their reproductive stuff. And and I was getting this ad because I'm in my 50s, over and over. Depo-Provera, if you have Depo-Provera, you got cancer, and you could get some money, there's a lawsuit, over and over. And it's like, I never did, barely have ever been on birth control, thank goddess, because I tried when I was young and it made me crazy. I'm like, I'd rather be pregnant than this crazy. Knock on wood, I never got pregnant, but anyway, it was just like inundating me, and I was like, wow, what is it, like, what is this? It's like, and what does it do to the mind? What does the mind do with that information? And that's what we really got to think about with this mind control. They just suggest things and we take it on, and then it's on our mind, so we're going to draw in other things that relate to that, because that's what we're thinking, because we're creating everything with our mind, right? So if you go into the metaphysical understanding of the mind, and then these nefarious groups that want to control the mind, it's ingenious. It's like, I'll just start thinking about, oh, parasites, parasites. I do a parasite cleanse. Turns out if wipe everything out on your body, the parasites are actually eating the toxins. So here's another approach to parasites that people talk about that aren't doing allopathic modalities. They're doing opposites, other ways of looking at health, because there are other ways of looking at health, and there always have been, but it's been slowly oppressed with great intention, So, yeah, so if you wipe out everything that's keeping the balance, and I understand you go to different countries and maybe you've gotten something, but what's been promoted as an acceptable counter narrative, because there's narrative and counter narrative, like during COVID, there was an acceptable counter narrative. At first, it seemed like it wasn't acceptable, but of course, because we hear about it, we know it is acceptable, and that's the ivermectin issue. And that's also made by Merck. It's a pharmaceutical. So it's being mass promoted since then. First, it started out, as horse, dewormer, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, there is a human form, but it's just sort of like how it was presented. So everyone who was not on the COVID narrative was like, oh, I'm going to get ivermectin. And yeah, I was in Egypt in 2021 and I brought back like 10 boxes of ivermectin because it was cheap. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to have this. I never took it, but did give it away to people and stuff. And the thing about the parasite cleansing is it can make you feel good initially. And then, a few months later, you're having an issue again. So this system is very complex and needs a lot of parts. And if parasites were bad, then we wouldn't, why do they exist? They exist, turns out, to eat the toxins. And I remember having issues with like candida, like an imbalance that I was having. And I thought it was from an antibiotic, which it could have been. The antibiotic I took was really strong and had a really negative reaction, and didn't do probiotics to replace what was happening. And I was in the tropics too, so it's really hard with candida anyway, because it's so moist. So, but I also had like fillings from childhood that were, and I look back on this and it's like, oh, these fillings were probably leaking, and the candida is supposed to eat toxins also. This is like a whole other perspective that I never knew about then. And I did have my fillings removed slowly. And of course, my fillings were, I was, over denticized as a child, because my mother was she was a hygienist. And so she was just like, oh, we got to have good teeth. And that meant overdoing it for children, because I didn't even have cavities, but I had to have my fillings, my molars filled, because they were deep. They had a thing called buccal pits. They're deep. They probably don't even do that today. And it's just like, well, let's just see how the child grows before, filling everything. But they didn't. They filled it all. And so I got them out, and I did a whole protocol to get rid of, the candida and supplements and all kinds of things. But, my body eventually balanced out. But it's just interesting, if I would have treated it a different way, how that would work out. So, we can recover from these ways. And I saw an alternative medicine person to help, a naturopath, to help get rid of that and balance my system. But oh man, it required a lot of changes to my diet, to everything. So yeah, so just in this Gemini season, think about the narratives that are being promoted and what people are talking about, and just apply a few more questions to what you're hearing. Because when I hear something over and over, I just go, oh, that's a narrative that's being promoted. Why? There's a reason. And I think we're already facing a lot of kind of narratives. There's a lot of narratives with health that are really wearing on people if you don't have this understanding of mind control and social engineering. And it applies to everything in this reality. Everything has this overlay. But you know what is to be trusted is nature. The elements, the trees, the grass. Those are what you should be listening to, tuning into. Water, air, the elements. These are here, beings here to help us, here to guide us. And also the ancestors. It's definitely where I get a lot of my information. And I'm so glad to know my oldest ancestors. But we have to be clear with who we're working with, because I wasn't always clear with who was around me and what was the voice in my head. And when you start to trust yourself more, you will start to listen to the voice. It's a quiet voice that just says, oh, do this. It's not loud. And that it will grow as you begin to trust in your own voice, your own inner voice. So if you don't want to tune into these other things, it's always in here that is telling us from the heart, that is telling us what to do, how to move forward, and just ask questions. It's good to just ask questions. I'm full of questions all the time. Anyways, thanks for listening to my ramblings, and I hope you have a good Gemini season.